how to motivate parents or caregivers that come out of the gate saying, just fix my child. And how do we get them from that position of not wanting to really be involved to a position quickly of, I see what's in it for me to be involved with my family and to cooperate and really look at strength-based approaches. And I'm lucky enough to have Sophia with me, and she took the master class with me on this family trauma model. And Sophia's been gracious enough to be a special panelist, to even sometimes I'll ask her questions, won't put her too much on the spot, but also to share her experience a little bit about with some of these techniques that she's. So, Sophia, could you introduce yourself, where you're from, and how we met, and how you, just a little background, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Sophia and I am an orthopedagogue. I'm saying it in Dutch, it's easier for me. And last year I did the master class, and after that I decided to do the certification course, which kind of is a group supervision course, where you talk about your own cases working with the FST program. Um, yeah, so I finished that, and Scott asked me to join today, um, to, well, maybe answer some questions, but mostly let him present what FST is all about, and hopefully get you yeah, want to enroll in the in
Or
thinking
just
more
get
about the
excited,
program.
yeah, or get
Yeah,
excited about the idea of family systems work,
yeah, for sure. Yeah,
because family therapy, let's face it, is scary. I mean, when I got out of graduate school and I was, my first job was at a psychiatric hospital. I was the social worker or family therapist on staff. But when I brought the families in, they started yelling and screaming at each other. I just froze. And so I went back to say, I want to learn how to look at trauma through a family systems lens, because I saw that if we changed the child and helped them and we didn't change the family, there was often relapse. So, with that, let's get started. And Holland is very near and dear to my heart because my wife, I met her in Holland. She speaks fluent Dutch, and I love the word hazella, if I pronounced it right. So I have been to Holland many times, and the beauty of Holland, I feel, is in its people. And so I just am just blessed to be here today. With technology, I can actually share with you from my home in Montana. So yeah, so I really have a special place in my heart for the Netherlands. And yeah, so anyways, with that, let's get started on the technique today. That, and I will also post, or Allison, my colleague and facilitator today, will post this slide share in your chat bar. We'll also email this to you at the end, so you can really just kind of sit back and enjoy. You can take notes, but know that you're going to get a copy of this, so you don't have to um, take as many notes. Um, I asked Yannicka of the Reno group to come on today, because if at the end of today you're like, Sophia, I want more of this, I want to go deeper, I am planning to come out in person in November, the 9th, 10th, and 11th, depending on changing conditions of travel. If I, for whatever reason, at the last minute, I cannot come in person like last year, I will do this virtually. And actually, Sophia was part of that class virtually when we were in the middle of COVID. So my plan is to be there in person, because in person is so much better than virtual. They're both good, but in person is wonderful. So my name is Dr. Sells, and I started 2 years ago the Family Trauma Institute. And my goal was to help professionals to become experts at family trauma. I thought there was a real need in our field. We had plenty of models for the individual, um, but we needed more step-by-step tools to go from the individual to the family. And so, my first book, and for background of research, my first book was Treating the Tough Adolescent. Then I wrote a children's or a parenting book, and this is the book I'm going to be talking about. This tool from this book, um, the Treating the Traumatized Child, a Step-by-Step Family Systems Approach. Um, the model, as Sophia said, is called Family Systems Trauma, or FST, and the website where you can get additional resources if you want to after this is familytrauma.com. Now, within this model, there's 12 core techniques, and the one that I'm going to show you today is number 2, motivational phone call. Now, many of you have probably taken a form of motivational interviewing, but this is very what's called strategic. The difference is that you're going to walk away today with a script. You're going to have very strategic questions to ask people to get them motivated. Um, and traditional motivational interviewing is more non-directive, where you kind of lead the client to motivate themselves. Here, it's much more directive, strategic, where you ask strategic questions to quickly motivate um, the client. And you can do this with couples, you can do this with individuals. Of course, today we're going to be focused with parents or caregivers, but I will try to bridge the gap to say, okay, if I was working with an individual, how might I adapt this? Or if I was working with a couple. So it can be used for all 3 types of clients. I'm going to ask you right out of the gate if you wouldn't mind putting in your chat bar. I'm a very interactional person. I like to not just be a talking head. I like to just interact with folks. Um, I want to ask you if you agree with some of these top challenges that we face. Do you agree that sometimes the parents you work with, or grandparents, or aunts, or uncles say they come in right out of the gate with this mindset of, I just want you to fix my kids? How many of you have experienced that there's this kind of blindness, metaphorically, where they can't see their role in the child's problem? And even when you point it out and say that you're contributing to it, there's resistance, or resistance is a bad word. I would say just like put offness to that. They're also coming in with generational trauma, where there's there's a lot of trauma they've experienced, so it casts some blindness into being able to clearly see what's going on because they're wounded. And I've always found that hurting people hurt others. I don't know if you agree with that or not. And they also see the counselor as the enemy. We see this really amplified when somebody is like a child protective service worker in the United States. They have to come in because of a report of abuse or neglect. And there's just the family's guard is like up. So here's the question for you. What's the top barrier that you have experienced? There might be all of them, but if you had to name like the top one, I'll put these up again. Is it just fix my kids? Is it can't see the role? Generational trauma? Oh, you're an outsider. Or it might be another one. But what do you see as the top barrier as to preventing engagement? And then I love this. What's your hunch or theory about what's causing this? Like, everybody has a hunch, everybody has a theory. So, what do you think is blocking or causing kind of this barrier? So, let me see what you guys said here. So, uh, Bajika said generational trauma. Arlie said number 1. Okay. So, guilt. Okay. Um, Chantel is that the expert distrust. self-protection, excellent. And a lot of generational trauma. I agree. So, Sophia, let me ask you if you could unmute your camera for a second or unmute your phone. For you, if you had to think of like a top barrier and a hunch as to why, what do you think for you? Or what have you seen with colleagues?
I think that one of the things that was put in it was the generational trauma. People recognize that, but I think it's also underlying the reactions, like you're an outsider or my kid is the problem, because they never learn to well talk about it, or they're used to these patterns within their family. So
Mm.
I think it's uh, yeah,
Yeah,
combined
so
with your.
let me see if I'm tracking you. There's two hunches or theories you have that brings about some lack of cooperation or motivation. One is you see a lot of parents that come in with generational trauma, and that impacts, and it's scary for them, like some of the comments, to see what if I have to say that I have some problems. That's
Mhm,
scary.
yeah.
And then a lot of people all over the world think linearly, right? They say cause and effect. You have a problem, fix that person.
Hmm.
And human beings don't always think systemically. And so you have to start with people saying, I don't know why I'm here, because they're like, of course you're just going to fix my kid. And so that linear mindset, is that what you see as well, if I'm tracking you?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I saw it also in the chat that um, a lot of people that I work with, and I think a lot of people work with, have been inside the system for a long time.
Okay.
So they also have bad experiences, and they're really hesitant. Or I think we see a lot of, I see it here, complex divorce cases.
Mhm.
We see that more and more and more, and people that get sent to us. By other ones. Yeah, it's a really complex world, really. I
Yeah,
think you can
and
imagine everyone in chat.
but yet the implications of not trying to motivate the parents or caregivers, what are the implications if we can't, that you've seen?
Sorry?
So if we don't motivate the parents and they stay in this place of just fix my kid and we don't move them off that, what are the negative implications for us for treatment that you've seen?
And you won't be able to treat the family or even the kid. I think you'll get a lot of no-shows. I don't think it will be it will get started, and that's why I think this um, webinar is a good thing
Good
to
start.
yeah,
Yeah.
for people to learn about your vision about the motivational phone call, because I think that
Yeah.
that will
Yeah.
help a lot for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, I would also say the implications I've seen are called stickiness or second order change. Let me quickly define that and see if you guys agree in your chat bar. So, in systems thinking or cybernetics, you have this idea of first order change, which means that let's just say we don't um, engage the parents or we don't engage the family. The implications are first order change is that the child gets better under individual treatment, but it doesn't stick. That when they go back home or therapy's over, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So the child is kind of moving back towards relapse. A good example would be a child that I've worked with in the old days. I would do anger management or anger control training. The child would be able to change their anger. The parent didn't change at all. And the parents would actually say, I don't know what you're learning in that class, but I'm not part of it. I don't know what you're doing. And the parent would still trigger the child over and over again. Before long, the child went back to first order change. What we're talking about with this technique is to start to move this family system towards second order change. Second order change means that they are adopting a new operating system, a new way of thinking that long after treatment's over, it sticks. So let's say that one of the undercurrents, which is a term in this model I'll talk about, is that the undercurrent is the parent starts treatment where for generations they learned as kids, always catch your kid doing something wrong. I'm going to lecture, I'm going to nag, I'm going to criticize, and they don't know that it's not helping. So you're trying to say, what if you caught your child doing something right? Well, that sounds great on paper, but if you've never done it, it's hard to become the new normal. So this technique is not just to motivate, but to start moving the family towards second order change. How many of you in practice by yes would like to see more second order change? Okay. That we want to get stickiness. We don't want to just work so hard with the child only to see relapse later. So, excellent points everybody's making. So, that's why it's just more than a technique. We're trying to move the family to second order change. So, you had a lot of theories about what's causing this. And the number one answer or one of the top was generational trauma. So let's dive into this, the motivational phone call. So when I do the master class, I take a technique one at a time and I break it up into three bite-sized pieces. So I'm going to share with you as if you ever were to take the master class in the future, it would be broken down into these pieces, each technique. So the first part of this technique is going to be, what do you mean, Scott, by harsh versus soft startup, and why should I care? Okay. The second mini lesson is going to be the actual script. I want to be able to have something I can use the next day at work. I don't want just a bunch of theory. And then what's really important is lesson three is delivery. Like any script you get, if you don't deliver it, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. You can have a great script, but if the delivery's not good, it just kind of sits there. Um, so today, let me go through soft startup. Now, the background's interesting. If those of you who are attending today are familiar with the model structural strategic family therapy, it was a really big model in the 80s and 70s. And one of the founders is Salvador Minuchin for structural, and strategic family therapy was Jay Haley. Now, I got a chance to be an apprentice with Jay Haley. I went to him as a young doctoral student and said, could I be an apprentice? Could I learn from you? Could I do research from you? I read your books. They're great. And I said to him one day, I said, Jay, why aren't my clients showing up? My parents, I mean. He said to me over lunch or over the phone, I can't remember. He said, Scott, you're the problem, not your parents. He said, what do you mean? I said, don't you think by them not showing up that they're maybe not ready for change? They might be unmotivated. They might be a little resistant. He's like, no, here's a better frame of reference. This is a better narrative. He said, parent so-called resistance, as you call it, Scott, like they just don't show up, they stop coming in, they don't do your homework. Think of it this way. What if it's the best way that they know how to tell you that what you're doing is not working, that maybe you're not inspiring them? And in fact, if you don't believe me, ask them. Now, this was a paradigm shift for me, because when families wouldn't show, I would tend to really rest in the fact that they were not ready for change, unmotivated, etc. But when I started asking families in my research, many families would tell me, I just didn't want to hurt your feelings, but you're not inspiring us. You're not really giving us why we should work with you. Not everybody, but some. And so in my research, I looked at this and I had a light bulb moment where I started seeing, with the family's help, that we started treatment harshly. Um, where the first interaction with the family was a phone call to just say, "My name is Dr. Sells. I'm from so and so agency. I'd like to schedule an appointment." And sometimes I wouldn't even call, it would just be the office assistant would call. And families would tell us there's no relationship here. Um, and when I went back to Jay Haley, he said, "Yeah, people think therapy begins with the first meeting, but I would contend that therapy begins with the first phone call." And when I looked at couples research, many of you are familiar with John Gottman's work on couples research. He also had this phenomenon of a harsh or soft startup, and he could predict with great accuracy if couples were headed for divorce, if they would start up the conversation harshly with criticism such as, "You know what, you're always this way. You never let me have a voice. And I'm going to tell you what's wrong with you." That's a harsh startup. Versus soft startup is like, "We can get through this together. I know I'm going to have some difficult things we got to talk about, but I love you. I care about you." That's a soft startup. So families were saying, "You know what? If you could have a call with us that would have us more trusting, more receptive." And then all of a sudden, this technique was born out of this research, which my type of research is called qualitative, ethnographic, grounded theory. It's very labor intensive, but you go to the actual families themselves. Instead of just numbers, you'd go to them and say, "What do you need? What are you missing?" It takes more time, in this case, 10 years, but the fruit of the labor is great because the families are directing us in the research. So, former President Theodore Roosevelt was famously quoted, and I believe that going forward, this is so key. "People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." Um, and Sophia, do you agree with that important quote? And if so, why? If you could unmute your camera and your phone. I mean, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Why is that such an important paradigm?
I think they don't want to be judged. They just want to be listened at and taken seriously. They are the expert. Don't come in and tell me what to do. I think
Yeah.
that's important.
Well, has this technique helped you move in that direction? Because I don't know about you, but in the old days, I would be like, I'd be more concerned with being Dr. Sells. Here's what I know, you know? Uh, and I didn't say, well, they won't care how much I know until they know how much you care. So using this technique, has it helped move you as a professional to, maybe you already did this in the beginning and maybe this just enhanced you, but has the technique helped you as the practitioner move more and more to, yeah, I got to make sure people care how much I know? Has that helped you?
Well, I think I already did it, but it for sure helped me to improve it, and especially at the beginning, like I used to call, "Hi, we got a Verizon," don't know the
Right.
English word,
Yeah.
and I like to schedule an intake,
Yeah.
so very formal. Sometimes the parent would begin to talk and you would have a conversation, but most of the time it would be very
Sure.
yeah, short and formal, and just planning a conversation or a meeting.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
yeah, but I really like the
Yeah.
that you beforehand start a little bit, and I think it will, because some of the people might say, "Oh, the secretary does that work," or um it costs a lot of money, we don't get paid beforehand. But I think it will really help
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
for the rest of the yeah
Yeah, and
of
that
that.
that's really a good point because I saw this quote once is you can't do therapy with an empty chair. so so what happened would be what that meant to me was that yeah, I might take 15 minutes and not bill, but if my client shows up motivated and ready to cooperate, then word of mouth spreads. And also they show up because, oh my gosh, how many times would I wait for somebody to show up for an appointment and it was a no-show? And that cost me more time, more money, more effort to try to re-engage them. And then it was pretty hard after that. And so, yeah, we had to actually, in my agency said, let's try this as an experiment because what people would say is, we've always done it this way. And I said, well, could we try? And so the therapist at a private practice I worked at was like, whoa, this is good. So I like how you like are thinking of the technique in terms of operating system as well. So thank you very much. Let's go on. So um, that I just wanted to pause there, and I got some of the folks saying I totally agree with this statement, but I just think it's such a good statement. It's great to have on your wall and think about. So the soft startup in mini lesson one out of the three is that I stopped seeing parents as resistant and I started seeing it this way, that parents with generational trauma are hurting. They have competency, they have something called the authentic self. That competency is quiet. And what happens is there's so much noise around the parent, so much problems, like clatter means just like, noise, so much stress that parents, like kids, have competency, but it's underneath the tension. And so these questions are almost like to uncork a bottle, like a champagne bottle or any bottle. And once you uncork it and lower the noise, what you see come up bubbling to the surface is competency. Now, to prove my point, I'm going to share with you an audio call with a mom that was pretty much done with treatment, burnt out from treatment, and you'll see that you can use this technique at any point in treatment. Obviously, Sophia said the best time to use it is when it's a new case. But I've used these questions when I've been a consultant for a case that's been on someone's caseload for a year, 6 months, 3 months. It re energizes the family. And that's what you're going to see in this case example where the therapist asked me to be a consultant. And she said to me, this case is the family's just like done. And I said, well, can I use these questions to revitalize? And so it helped the therapist see that this is a technique that changed her heart as well. So the other paradigm that's really important going forward, and I don't know how many of you agree with this statement, but it's key, is that parents, kids, and families will do well if they can, but they lack the tools and skills to do so. When I started seeing it from this lens, parents that would push my buttons or, they weren't too nice when I saw them, I realized that they didn't have the skills or tools to do well if they can. So they're just doing the best they can from the generational trauma because they learned how to parent from their parents. And if their parents didn't know how to parent, how are they just magically going to wake up one day? So, this model, family systems trauma, is a therapy of action. It's an approach that's very directive. It almost reminds me of a coach where families are stuck. And my colleague Jay Haley said to me, Scott, if the families could unstick themselves, they wouldn't be in your office. And that really resonated with me. So here's a question to come that we'll talk about at the end. I'll say this for the end. Imagine as we go through this technique, ask this question for yourself. How is the concept of principle, this idea of soft startup, how will this be helpful for you as a clinician going forward? How will timing be important? Like how much you care first? How will it be for you to look at the client tomorrow, today, that competency is quiet and you got to lower the noise? How much help will it be for you as a clinician to understand that families will do well if you can. If nothing else from this mini webinar, people have told me, Scott, these three things they've changed my practice or they've helped me. So, with that baseline, let's go to lesson two. Now, Allison will put in your chat bar the actual script. Now, so this call to action is for you to take these 5 questions and try them out. Now, a couple things as I go through these questions. I say to the family or couple or individual or parent, I say, do you have 15 minutes? Now I do that on purpose and I actually have my clock in front of me because I don't want this to turn into a therapy session. I want this to be very directive. And so I'm actually going to have Sophia help me out for a second here where I'm going to do just a mini role play with her. Sophia didn't know that this was coming, so thank you, Sophia, for being a good sport. But what I want to show everybody is the process or delivery called stick and move. What that means is like a prize fighter sticks and moves. So what'll happen is when you ask this first question, the risk is that the family will go on and on and on when you talk to the parent, and you've got to cut them off. You've got to say to them, let me interrupt you. Here's what I hear you saying. Because, even before the phone call, ask for their permission to interrupt them. I don't want to be rude. So I always start with question, what are the difficult experiences? And I only want to have about 5 minutes here. And so my job is to be like, stick and move, summarize. So let's just say I'm calling Sophia and she's a single parent mom or dual parent, doesn't matter. I introduce myself. I ask this first question, and immediately Sophia goes into a long therapy session of anger and bitterness. And I have to what's called stick and move. I have to be able to cut her off respectfully and summarize because I want Sophia to leave this call saying, Scott just didn't listen to me. He heard me. And so I'll just start off with ring, ring. Is Sophia there, please?
Yeah, hello.
Hi, Sophia. My name is Dr. Scott Sells. I work for the Family Trauma Institute, and I have a referral that you made because you were having some problems with your daughter. And I'm just wondering if you have like just 15 minutes so that I could maybe get to know you and ask you a few questions because I would be the counselor working with your family. So, do you have 15 minutes just to talk and chat with me?
Yeah, well, if it's only 15 minutes, I have time. Yes.
Okay, great. Well, what what are some of the difficult experiences that you've had to go through with your daughter in the last year? I think uh, there's some problems. I'm not sure exactly what, but what have been some of the stressors or difficult experiences that you've had to go
Yeah,
through?
well, she keeps pushing my buttons, and she's acting out. She's screaming to me. She demands that I do everything for her. She throws with stuff.
Let me
She
start,
leaves the house.
Sophia. Wait, what? Sophia, 1 second. Let me see if I'm really tracking you here. So, what you're saying is one huge stressor for you is you use the word she pushes your buttons. She won't listen to you the first time you ask her. I think you kind of were leading to. Am I
Mhm.
close or way off?
No, no, no. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. And what else have you had to suffer?
Yeah, well, I think she has a bad boyfriend and she leaves the house. And yeah, I'm on my own, so I can't look at her all the time. And yeah, I have financial problems. I lost my job, and I don't really have anyone I can count on.
So, Sophia, let me
Uh,
ask you here. So, what you're saying is it even gets worse. She's out with a boyfriend that's not a good influence. You have stress of losing your job. It's been a lot for you. Is that close or way off?
yeah, it's been a lot. It's been a lot.
Okay, so freeze. So what I did with Sophia is I didn't fall into two traps. One is people will talk in chapters. Like if you don't interrupt them, they'll just talk to one topic, then they'll go to the next topic, then they'll go to the next topic. And I was taught in my graduate training, don't interrupt people. Let them just talk and vent. Well, it depends on the context. Here, if I let Sophia talk, she's on to 3 subjects, but when I just pause and say, "Let me see if I'm tracking you," I can add a few pieces to the story, but I can monitor the meeting so it doesn't go into a therapy session. And Sophia, as a client being in role or out of role, did did that help at all that I tried to summarize and give you space to say, am I close or way off? Yeah, what
Yeah,
was that like for you and why? Yeah.
I think it kind of gives structure for me, because if you ask what kind of difficulties, whoa, let me start. There's so much that I can't even uh, write it out. And I think with stopping and summarizing and checking, you still feel heard. Um,
Excellent point. And also the tendency for people that want to give solutions right away is like I did this training with uh, caseworkers in United States on their role is to give families resources. So when they started asking this question, almost all of them were like, "Oh, so you have some difficulties, Sophia? Let me give you 3 programs to try." And that wasn't the right time. The parent was like, "I'm just getting to know you. I don't want you to just come right out of the gate giving me programs." So again, this is something that why I do the master class is that when you come, we're going to be practicing delivery. Um, because the next question is really what's called a pattern interrupt. What that means is that the family is talking problem saturated talk. Here's all the problems. And they're not ready for the switch to go to um, solution focused, strength based. Families will tell me in our research, this was a game changer. This was a huge question. When you switched the conversation, when you said, when I get to know you better, what qualities and strengths would I come to admire about you as a parent? And then part 2, what qualities and strengths would I come to know about your daughter in this case, or son? So, Sophia, one more role play with you on this. I want to get the audience the feel of the switch in tone and tenor and cadence. And also throw me a curveball, Sophia, when I ask you the question, when I get to know you better, throw me a curveball where you say, there's nothing that you would like about me, or I don't know any strengths. And watch how I try to get out of that by a technique I call guessing. So, so here's how I would pivot or go to the next question. Sophia, you've gone through a lot of stress. And I know we're meeting each other or talking for the first time, but when I get to know you better, what qualities and strengths would I come to admire about you as a parent?
I don't really know.
Okay.
It's tough. I don't know. Don't think I have any qualities.
Well, one thing I sense, and I could be wrong because I know I don't know you that well, is that you're not one to give up easy, that you fight for your daughter. You're a
Yeah, of
fighter.
course. Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Could
That's
you give
part of being a parent.
yeah, so could you give me some examples of how you fought for your daughter?
Yeah, well, I seek treatment. I seek help. Um, I have conversation at school. Um, yeah,
So you're one of the things I already admire about you is that you're on this call with me. You could be doing other things, but in some ways, when you say fight, you go to school. I admire that about you because a lot of parents would just give up, but it seems like you're not going to give up on your daughter because if you do, who will fight for your daughter? Is that close?
Yeah, that's true.
And if I got to know your daughter better, what qualities would I come to admire about her?
She can be really thoughtful, I think. But
Could you give me
yeah,
give me some
not
example? Could you give me a few examples of that?
well when my mother died, yeah, she wrote a card for me, but that was a couple of years ago. So yeah,
So
it's hard,
freeze.
right?
Yeah. So freeze. There's two things here I want to show in terms of delivery. One is I won't give up so easy. When the parent says no, I'll just start guessing. And many people will correct you or say, yeah, you're right. But once they get talking, the research shows they'll keep talking. And then when you say qualities about their child, even if they start going back to the negatives, you pull them back to the positive and you always fan the flames of hope. Like if the parent in this case, Sophia said she's thoughtful, and I just go next question. I miss a golden opportunity to say, when you say thoughtful, what do you mean? Could you give me some examples? So another thing that's really important is when a family member, in this case a parent, says one thing, fan the flames, ask for more information. So I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of, delivery. And then if you go to the next question, which is really helpful, what do you think will happen to your child if these problems remain unfixed in the next 3 months, 6 months, or even a year from now? This is called an implications question. It's powerful. When people speak out loud, like things like, I think what Sophia would say is that she might drop out of school, or she may get pregnant, or she may continue to be vulnerable to other boyfriends. Whatever it is, she's speaking out loud that there's an urgency that we have to get going on this problem. And then parents like this question. It's helpful for me. Have you seen accounts from the past? And I'll say, I don't want to know their names in case I know them, because I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. But what have they missed with you? Because I don't want to make the same mistakes twice. Now, why that's important is parents will describe what they want from you differently. Like I've had uh, parents say to me, well, I was never involved. They never gave me tools. It just never worked. And so they're telling you what they need from you that will be different. And then I say, do you want to fix the problem fast, medium, or slow? And a lot of parents will say, fast, but I want it to stay. I don't want it to just stop. So these questions can also be asked in person. um and sometimes what will happen is I'll say, when the parent and the child comes in for the first meeting, I'll say, mom, do you remember when I asked you on the phone what are some qualities and strengths you admire about your daughter, and kind of remember what you said? Would it be okay if you said it again in front of your daughter? And so then the parent says, I think she was thoughtful, like Sophia would. And then I'll turn to the child, are there qualities and strengths you admire about your parent? This soft startup continues from the phone call into the first session. So, this is one of my calls to actions. Whether you go on with this model or not, I want you to try out the technique. And I want you to kind of look for these milestones. Every technique that I'm going to be teaching at the master class is going to have what's called performance outcomes. Like, okay, how do I know this technique is working? What are the milestones? So, one milestone you want to look for is, when I use this technique, is my show rate increasing, like to 80% or higher? When I talked to Jay Haley back in the day, my show rate was 40 to 50%. I thought that was great because my colleagues were less than me. So, one of the things I want you to look for is, does your show rate increase? Secondly, are you sensing that the clients are more motivated, that their hope is increasing? And do you get personally inspired and more hopeful and less jaded? It's as important for you as it is for the client. Because I use this technique with professionals and they're like, this will never work. Um, you know, I've worked with these parents for a long time and nothing will work. And so you can get jaded as well. So in this story here, I'll just play a minute of this so you can kind of get the flavor of it. Lucy comes to me as I'm in the role of consultant. She's 16 years old. The trauma is that she was bullied in school so much to the point where she won't go back to school. And this was 2 years ago. So in the 2 years, the trauma has manifested itself into depression, self-harm. But what the parents are upset about is the aggression and disrespect. Before the trauma, Lucy was, by all accounts from the parents, a really happy kid. But the parents have said, we're losing our empathy or losing our sympathy because we know she got bullied, but it's taking over the whole house. Now she's aggressive. Now she's disrespectful. So the parents are like, we don't like Lucy anymore. We love her, but we don't like her. So I asked mom, and I realized I talked to mom later, and she's like, Scott, this is the first time I've said anything positive about my daughter in probably over a year and a half. She said it felt good to talk about my daughter. And I said, well, why was that so important? Because she said it gave me hope. So I come in as a consultant a year into the case, and my goal is to revitalize the family, get them to be hopeful, and to say to the parents, I need your help. We can't give up on Lucy. So here, I want you to notice competency of the mom rise like a phoenix from the ashes. I lower the noise with the question, and her competency rises. So I want to create a soft startup. I want this mom to say, I'm not done yet with treatment. I'm more relaxed. I'm more receptive. I kind of like you, as a person. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So here, the session changes, or the phone call, not session, where, when I asked what are some of the difficult experiences, oh, she was ready to go with that. But when I started asking this question, listen to her voice tone pick up. And I'm just going to play a minute of it so you can hear it. Here we go.
Qualities that I would really admire about Lucy.
She's very creative. She's really good at music. That's one of her passions. She's great at photography. She's really talented in photography. She does draw here and there. She doesn't think she's good, but I think she's pretty good at it. She's very strong-willed, which can be a good and a bad thing.
Real quick, if you ask this question, the tendency of the parent that has gone decades or years of talking negative, like they catch their child doing something wrong, they will pull you back into the hopeless talk. So what you've got to be able to do is interrupt and say, strong-willed, can we go back to some of the strengths? And you've got to be willing to interrupt. In this case, mom pulls herself out of it. She starts going down the bunny trail of like negativity. She starts talking about strong-willed, but I don't go, yeah, tell me more about the negative. No, at this point, I'm saying talk about the positive. And look at what changes when she says, when you're creative.
But she's very creative. She's very intelligent. She has a lot of potential. And
when you say she's creative, is it, when you say she's creative, Jennifer, does that make you really proud of her?
It does. Yes.
Okay. And give me an example of her creative side. Like, is she creative with art? Is she creative with
Again, I want to
people?
highlight what I do with Sophia. Fan the flames of hope. When you say creative, can you give an example? When you say thoughtful, can you give an example? So the delivery of this script is as important as the script itself. So I gave you, what will you do if the parent has nothing positive to say? I start guessing. And if the parent still doesn't have anything positive to say, I won't keep pressing, I'll move on. But more times than not, you'll be pleasantly surprised that if you don't give up on the question too easy, parents want to go there. Um, so this is what my call to action is. You can see that each question has about 3 to 5 minutes. It adds up to about 15 minutes. If you go 18 minutes, don't go, oh my gosh, I'm 3 minutes over, but keep it within that. And the way you do that is stick and move, interrupt, summarize, etc. And so the other thing is that to inspire you, a lot of times I'll ask clients the next day or next week, I'll say, you remember that motivational call? I don't even call it motivational call. Say, remember the phone call? Was that helpful to you? And so I just want you to hear just a minute of how surprising it is to me how resilient people we work with are. How just a little bit of hope just opens people up. And so this mom, a Black mom whose kids are about to be removed, started in therapy was when she was 4. She's been in and out of hospitals all her life. She's heard voices. And I'm thinking to myself, does this technique really make a difference? So let's listen to mom. Her name's Keisha. And let's see how this small little technique makes a big change.
You really are very smart. And hey, what that left me with was a sense of hope, because I was able to really take a step back out of the situation and just look at myself and just understand, like, hey, you really are very smart. And hey, you really are a strong person. That helped because sometimes when you're going through crises or when you are in the midst of different changes in life, you as a person don't really look at yourself. You just, as a person, you look at yourself as the victim, or you look at yourself as,
so you got
help
flavor. And one of the things that you can do with your clients is that after you try the technique, you might ask, could I just ask you one question? We got about a few minutes. It's 15 minutes. Can I ask you like one question? Now we'll be at 17 minutes. And I'll ask the person, what was most helpful about this phone call? Not for my ego, but it really helps clients when they can say, you know, what was helpful about this was this. And so it creates dialogue for change. And so the takeaways today, and I'll go about 5 minutes over. And if you have to leave at the bottom of the hour, no problem. But I'm going to stay on longer to answer questions, and it's recorded. So if you have to go, no problem. But I'm here for you. And I'm going to take the time and not rush off because I have nowhere to go. If you got to go, no worries, but I'm going to stay a little longer to answer questions. I know we're coming close to the time. So motivate your parents to show up and cooperate. The 5 questions: move your parent beyond just fix my kid. I gave you 2 audio case examples and a role play with Sophia. Bless your heart, Sophia. Thank you for doing that. And so try it out for yourself. And if you do want to go deeper, we'll put the address in the chat bar. That the theory behind it is that when families or systems get stuck, they need someone in the here and now to help them get unstuck, or the idea of people will do well if they can, but they don't always have the tools. So I think the biggest difference people have told me is it's very prescriptive. It's very directive. Sophia, you can speak to that too. Would you say that that does, fit that the questions of the motivational, or another technique like the stress chart that's very directive? And, I don't know if you came into the master class as a directive therapist to fit your personality, but would you say that's a big difference from more traditional therapy sometimes, which is non-directive, or getting into more how you feel? Both are good, but would that be a way you would describe it, or how would you
I
describe
think I think it's really low key, and you can really discuss hard topics without being harsh or something. And I also said in the chat bar, but I said it in Dutch, that the model, you visualize everything. Hey, you have flip overs everywhere, and you really take the family with you on a
journey?
sort of hike, yeah, journey.
Yeah.
And step by step, you discuss it with them. You give them a voice, but on a really low key way. And with making everything visual, you really keep the family present, I think.
And when I say directive versus non-directive, how do you interpret that for your own self going forward? And how would you describe this model as directive, I guess?
I think it's really directive, and I think that's it's not that I didn't do it, and I think a lot of people are very directive, but it's with me the being directive and making it visual that really helped, I think.
Okay, great. Next question. Great question, by the way. And then Allison, you'll just have to take your phone off mute.
No, actually, this is where we need help from our Dutch friends too. If they could look at the Q&A, or there are several things that came in the chat that I'm just afraid I can't interpret.
Okay. I need my wife here to help me too.
A lot of people asked about accreditation, but that's already answered in the chat. And I answered someone.
I think one of the questions is that whether you need to have experience with the system, with family therapy or trauma therapy.
It's good. Well, like Sophia indicated, wherever you are in your development as a therapist, some people are, much more seasoned or been in the field a lot longer. Some are more beginners, some are out of school. And that's why I took the time with this model to make it, step by step. So I've had seasoned therapists say this really complements and enhances models that I really love, like EMDR, trauma focused CBT. It really is an enhancement. Like one of the techniques is how to integrate nutrition and trauma, or what's called strongholds, which is a cognitive piece that people get into that furthers the trauma. So people say they like the model because it's very integrative with a lot of principles. The other thing people say is when I'm never done family therapy, it's scary. They say it gives me kind of like a roadmap. As Sophia said, it gives me the visuals and it gives me the script, but it allows me to be my own person. So once I learn it, like training wheels, then I can be more and more me. I don't know if you would agree or not, Sophia, but it's kind of like step one, learn it. And then step two, it becomes more and more you. And I was wondering for you, did the model let you breathe? Where you could bring in other models, other approaches, but also be yourself? I don't know if you'd agree or disagree on that.
Yeah, for sure. I always like to be me and to have my own set of tools, and I really like to add this tool, but it's also a flexible tool. I think you can add stuff to it. I also give EMDR therapy, so you can combine that. You can pick elements out of it. in cases that you're already working with. Yeah.
And then I get a question, I get this question a lot is, why do you think the model is culturally sensitive to the Dutch culture? Because, you know, a lot of people are like, well, Scott, you developed this program in America, so how's it going to fit the Dutch culture? How's it going to fit, you know, Sweden culture, whatever culture? Why does this model, it's not perfect by any means, and you'll have to Dutchize it, which I mean is use different terms and different things. But why do you think the model is culturally sensitive to a large part to the Dutch culture?
Yeah, I think I don't really know, but I think it is, but I don't have a clear answer for it. You give parents a voice, and I think that it's a way that is more and more, being our way of work in the Netherlands. It's step by step, but also flexible. Getting the parents.
I remember in consultation with me, you'd say, Scott, can I use different words? Can I approach it differently? So the principles of structural, strategic, and parents wanting step-by-step can be across cultures. How you apply the words, the timing is your comfort level and how you integrate it to the family, but also the culture. I mean, I probably didn't be as crisp as I needed to be with that, but I don't know, was I close or way off there? Yep. Okay. So any other questions coming in on Dutch as we wrap up tonight? Either from Janneke or Sophia, my helper.
Just a practical point about the book. I'll put it in Dutch. Het boek is soms niet op voorraad. Dus het is handig als je van plan bent om hiermee aan de slag te gaan, om het echt op tijd te bestellen. Dat kan vaak gewoon bij Amazon, bol.com of de Study Store. Maar de voorraden zijn niet overal even groot. Dus hou daar eventjes rekening mee. Dat is in ieder geval handig om in je planning op te nemen. Oké. Dit was a note about the book, Scott.
There is one question in English I see. How about exposure or joint trauma narrative? Is the therapy only focusing on the family or also on trauma treatment, PTSD, like trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy?
It's both, and as you can see, like, let's say you have, cognitions are impacted by trauma. That's why I spend some time on even nutrition or neuroplasticity, or the body keeps the score. But what people have found who are really talented in trauma-focused CBT is they like the timing of the questions very much. And they say that, like you say, Scott, competency is quiet. The cognitions of many, many people, whether it's individual or couple, or in this case, family, they benefit from the strength-based approach and relationship. And so the cognitions start to change. Like you saw Lucy's mom and Keisha, where she says, I am smart, I am strong. That's a new cognition that's formulating, because you don't persuade people, people persuade themselves. And so that snippet from Keisha was a great example of how it can change cognitions. And that could have been an individual client as well, in this case, a parent. So that was an excellent question as well. So any last minute, thank you for some of the comments. Thanks for the inspiration. Cynthia says, I'm inspired. All right, she's going to try it out. Woo! Okay. I love Holland. So anyways, thank you guys for letting me share one technique out of 12. I hope to see some of you in November. And it was just fun to be with you guys today. And thanks for everything. And any parting things you want to say, Annika or Sophia, to this wonderful group of people?
Oh.
Okay.
No.
Well, yeah.
Just if you have questions, contact the Reno group at and our info desk is willing to help you, and they can direct you to me or to my colleagues.
I felt this was a very Hazella time today. So that's good. So thank you guys for everything, and have a great rest of your week.